Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have a discontinued gem. Could easily be a Vintage Hall of Fame review, but I don't know this one well enough. I'm just not versed enough in the house. And the only reason I'm getting to test this is thanks to a very kind friend in the community, Armando. All shout outs and love to you, my brother. Thank you for sending this along with that beautiful package you sent a week or two ago. I've gotten a chance to kind of dive into some of the stuff in there, but today we're wearing a decant from a house that actually I've never done a video on the channel, which is crazy for a vintage lover like me, that this house has been basically ignored, really because I don't have any bottles. And this is maybe one of their flagship fragrances, and I would love, right out of the gate, I will tell you, this is on the never-ending full bottle list. This is called Monsieur Carven from 1978. Now, this has been discontinued for a long time. I don't know exactly how long, maybe a decade or two. I have no clue. But it was perfumed by one of the greatest perfumers, in my opinion, Raymond Chaillan. He will definitely have a ranked perfumers portfolio video. If I have not done one already, he'll definitely have one done for him. And it's not only one of the best perfumers, but one of the best years in perfume. This came out in 1978, which is, you know, when I rank years, there's, when I think about great perfume years and what has come out, there's 1981, there's 1978, and then there's everything else, honestly. And so this opens up so herbal and aromatic and tart and classical, like, it gives me the feeling of, you know, a man like putting on an aftershave back when you would just slap yourself, you know, with the aftershave when you put it on. That's how you're supposed to apply it, right? That's the feeling that it gives you in the opening. This classical touch, very herbal and aromatic and very sharp, okay? The sharpness, I think, is added from this very anisic-like feeling from Tarragon. Now, 1978 is the year of kind of the anise fragrance for men. Azzaro Porom, which I will do a Vintage Hall of Fame review. This will get a Vintage Hall of Fame review on the channel one day because I have a bottle and I've worn it a lot and I know it. But this I'm still learning. This is the first time I've worn this as my scent of the day, although I did get a chance to wear it to bed. So you can see I put a little bit of a dent in the decant that he sent me. But it's so beautiful. So I just sprayed, by the way, another spray. And I've got about a 6-hour dry down right here. So it opens up very classical, very tart, sharp, tart, and slightly starts to turn to green. Although not green in the sense like a proper green fragrance, green in the sense that there's a little hint of green that comes along with this aldehydic, slightly citrusy opening. And the citruses are beautiful. They really shine in the opening. You can really feel the citruses in a way where, you know, you have to remember 1978, you're probably expecting something that this is not, okay? So you're expecting that newer age of fragrances from 1978, the Lagerfeld colognes, the, you know, you're expecting Dunhill Blend 30. It's none of that, right? But what ends up happening is, along with the beautiful citruses, which I believe are made up of bergamot and lemon, there's a little bit of neroli. And I think that neroli, which I did, this is not a top 10 neroli on the channel. You can check it out if you want to dive into that note a little bit more. Neroli is probably what's adding a little bit of greenness, like a fresh greenness. And tarragon. And tarragon sometimes can feel like a slightly green tilt on anise. Okay, so imagine this old school cologne, slap yourself with it, feel, and very vintage, very classical, masculine in style, but along with that, what ends up happening is a little bit of soapiness starts coming through, like this old school, clean, soapy vibe. That's where the shaving feel comes in. I don't think there's any shaving foam feel, but I do think there's this, almost like this Pinard Clubman aftershave feel, a little bit spicy, a little bit soapy, and then instantly what ends up happening is crazy. Within 5 or 10 minutes, and I just applied this about 5 minutes ago. Already I'm starting to see the transition, the change happening. There is one of the earliest transitions in perfume that I've come across, and what ends up happening is it turns, instantly it turns into this powdery, old school masculine scent that will remind you, if you have any base in classical perfumery, it will remind you of the masculines from decades before 1978. So we're talking about fragrances from the 50s and 60s, okay? Or maybe even somewhat the early 70s, but mostly the 50s and 60s is where really what comes to mind for me. It really feels like Raymond Chaillan took this old school DNA, even old school for 1978, and sort of transitioned it into something that is slightly one foot in the new age and one foot in the old age. But that one foot in the old age is very preeminent, okay? So instantly, once that transition happens, you're going to be reminded of fragrances that I've reviewed or discussed on the channel over the years that get very little love in the fragrance community. One is Monsieur L'Envant. That is a fragrance that gets very little love in the community. I have a review on the channel from 2 years ago. I reviewed that, and I was shocked 2 years ago that there were no reviews on YouTube of Monsieur L'Envant. And that's one. The other one, which very interestingly, I had a gentleman come on the channel. If you've been following the channel for a long time, or you're one of those people that go back and watch old videos or old interviews, you will have come across this interview from a gentleman named Jacques Masson. And you can see right here, this is licensed by Mr. Masson's family at the time, and this is called Canon Cologne. And so Mr. Masson was a fan, or a sort of like mentor, if you will, to the great Anuj at Enchanté. He agreed to come on my very small channel at the time, and he did like an hour interview with me. It was great just kind of chatting with him and his thoughts and what has happened to the fragrance world in the meantime. But there's a little bit of sort of the powderiness of Canon Cologne. If you ever smell Canon, this is from 1966. That is a pretty good comparison to what happens when that powdery bit really twists. It's already happened. So that's 10 minutes in. Let's call it 10 minutes. You're going to get that powderiness. It just goes from this sharp, herbal, aromatic, tart, classical, slap yourself, masculine opening to a transition that starts to feel like it's of the decades where men weren't supposed to wear cologne or fragrances at the time. That was a woman's thing. So the men's fragrances were either sort of very powdery, talcum powder feel, or they were very, very light. You know, they weren't meant to scream or shout. They were meant to be very, very close to the skin. So only if, basically, if your wife came up at the time and hugged you and kissed you, she would smell it on you. But other men sitting next to you at the coffee bar or the water cooler couldn't smell it on you, right? That was the idea back in the day. So same name, Monsieur by the House of L'Envant, different house, and then also Canon by or Canon Cologne, let's say. They changed this to the Eau de Toilette. I think after Jacques Masson's family had the distributor, it went to Scannon, and then Scannon sold it to another house that now makes this in China, so it's complete crap from what I hear. I've never smelled the new one, but basically what ends up happening is the civet in L'Envant's iteration of Monsieur is much more powerful in front and center, whereas the powder, I think, in Canon is it kind of overtakes things a little bit more than the powder in Monsieur Carven, okay, from 1978. So I know a lot of Monsieurs floating around, but that's just kind of a 30,000-foot overview. There is more, though, more comparisons as time goes on. But what is so interesting about this composition is not necessarily that it smells vintage even for 1978. Like I said, it smells very vintage for 1978. But what catches my attention is how it wears, right? The pendulum doesn't just swing. It's not like a transition, which transitions in perfume are beautiful. There should be a journey. It should tell a story. It should start somewhere. It should end somewhere. You should get to know the perfume. You should live in the perfume, right? And it should become one with you. You should be passionate about it, right? But the pendulum doesn't just only swing towards the powders and this beautiful floral heart, which I'm guessing it's really the floral heart which makes up this sort of powdered accord that we're basically smelling. Very, very high quality ingredients as well, as was the trend back in the day. But the iris and orris/orris accord, whatever you want to call it, is probably the engine behind the powdery heart that kind of gives the appearance it'll take over. So you start to feel like this powdery heart will sort of take over, along with the floral heart in here is made up of carnation, rose, and jasmine. Okay, so those are the three florals in the heart, along with some patchouli, cinnamon, and vetiver. All right, so so you start thinking, okay, the powdery bit, the floral heart, I kind of have a feeling how this is going to go, and you start to think you figured the fragrance out. At least on my skin, what ends up happening is the fragrance seems to like waffle back and forth between the top and the mid. It's almost like a pendulum swinging, okay? So between that aromatic, citrusy, sort of fresh, clean, soapy accord with that sharp, anisic, tarragon feeling, and the powdery floral heart, which we were just talking about. And it's almost like the top of the fragrance will not go down without a fight. Like the heart of the fragrance thinks that it has the battle won, and all of a sudden the pendulum swings again, and you start to get hints of that soapy aromatic bit again. And then it swings back the other way, and the powdery bits start to take over, and it just kind of seesaws like this back and forth for the first, I would say, almost hour. Really, as the first hour comes to a close, maybe the heart of the fragrance really does start to take over, and those more volatile, citrusy notes fly off the skin a little bit faster, right? And it starts to lose the battle. But it's a very interesting composition. The way that it wears is stunningly beautiful. I love it. And the top, like I said, won't go down without a fight. So eventually, the floral heart wins out. The quality of the rose and jasmine and that old school carnation, which adds a bit of this almost Abbey Rouge-like, feel. This is one of my favorite 1960s fragrances of all time. This will definitely get a Vintage Hall of Fame review. Abbey Rouge, I think, is one of the greatest masculines ever created. And so if you just think about that, Abbey Rouge, spicy, powdery take on carnation, and it's almost like, what's interesting about it is this combination sits on this oriental style bed of ingredients, okay? So what's so amazing about the first hour is that back and forth tug of war, at least on my skin, feels almost synchronized, right? Like the top gets a little bit of the way up the hill, and then the heart pulls it down, and the heart starts running up the hill, and then the top pulls the heart back down, and then you're back to the aromatic top, and then you're back to the powdery floral heart. And it's almost like the synchronized back and forth of the pendulum swinging, right? And you start to get into this groove, almost like you're understanding the fragrance, like you're figuring it out, okay? Even on first wear, I started to feel like, okay, I think I've figured this out. Like, I'm getting an idea of what's going on. You know, there's a little bit of back and forth, there's a little bit of transitions, but I think I have an idea. It doesn't seem that complex all in all if it keeps on like this, but it doesn't keep on like that is the thing. So what ends up happening is that oriental bed that it ends up sitting on, and that synchronized pendulum back and forth, right when you think you figured it out, right? And another transition starts to take place. So around the 1 hour mark, those heavier oriental style bass notes start to make an appearance and really start to show their face, okay? And so if you read some of the comparisons on Monsieur Carven, okay? If you read some of the comparisons here, some people inevitably are going to say it smells like opium from 1977, from a year earlier, which is a very interesting comparison because they both have oriental touches, if you will. But, and rumor has it, Raymond Chaillan, the perfumer of Monsieur Carven, actually worked on the top of opium. He was one of the ones who made that mandarin orange-like orangey top of opium. He doesn't get credit for it in the note listing, only Jean-Louis Suizac and Jean Amic do, but he actually created a top of opium. But what's crazy is that these two fragrances, Opium, which is right there, sorry, I didn't mean to flick you off, right there, and Monsieur Carven could not be two worlds further apart. I mean, they are absolutely worlds apart. And the title of the advertisement from back in the day, it's funny, it says the title of the advertisement is Another Line for Yourself. Another line for yourself. Very interesting line if that French to English translation is correct, especially since it's the 70s and 80s. Another line for yourself could mean many different things. But what ends up happening on my skin around the 1 hour mark is it feels like the pendulum swinging kind of starts to halt, right? Like it comes to a grind, and these heavier ingredients in the base start almost having this concrete-like effect on the back and forth of the pendulum, and it just kind of weighs everything down until the 1 to 2 hour mark of the scent is really where the meat of the fragrance starts to kick in, because this is where the heavier ingredients start to show their face. Myrrh, civet, definitely you start getting more of the civet, you start getting more of this castoreum, which starts to show its face. It's almost like the ship is still kind of waffling back and forth in the water, in the waves, but it's anchored, right? The anchor has been dropped, it's not moving, but you're still feeling the back and forth tug of the ship, okay? The pendulum is still trying to swing, but it's anchored down. And along with the civet, which is clearly prominent in the base, okay, you start to get heavy oak moss and powdery heavy oak moss and resins like myrrh, but there is this particularly beautiful execution of leather done in the vintage style with a little bit of castoreum, but what's crazy is that even though all of these heavy oriental notes start to take shape, so I mentioned things like myrrh, okay? There's labdanum, there's vanilla, there's castoreum, there's civet, there's animalic civet, there's a leathery note, there's that powdery orris thing going on, there's cinnamon, there's all these heavier notes. It doesn't wear heavy, okay? Even though the heavier notes start to emerge and you can get them, I think there is this part of the fragrance that just constantly surprises me. And maybe it's because it's my first full wear, but I think it does something that I would consider all great perfumes do, and that's that they just continuously surprise. I mean, they don't do what you would expect. They shock you a little bit. They surprise you a little bit. And it's just very interesting to me as a perfume lover how Raymond Chalin took these heavy ingredients that were used 1 year earlier in something like opium. They got that part right. They did use a lot of the same ingredients. I mean, there's no Apopanax or anything like that, but they're used in such vastly different executions. I mean, they're, like I said, worlds apart, okay? And he incorporates them in a way where they still work as an anchor in the fragrance, but they wear light on your skin. It's almost like, everything that you're smelling just wears like a light, thin. I could easily wear this in the summer. Actually, I am wearing this. It's May in Texas, and I'm wearing this right now as my scent of the day. And I think it works absolutely beautifully. This is the kind of, now, most people would say this is a winter scent. I like to wear the even heavier leathers and stuff like that in the winter, so I would have no problem wearing this in the summer. In fact, I think the lighter execution of some of those heavier oriental type notes is necessary for what Raymond Chalin was trying to show here, because what ends up happening is some of those floral heart start to kind of fade a little bit, but there's one note that doesn't fade, and that is sandalwood, okay? Old school, probably Mysore sandalwood. And the comparison many people make into the dry down is with what many people consider one of the greatest sandalwood fragrances of all time. This will definitely get a Vintage Hall of Fame review on the channel one of these days. I think I've done a video on the flanker for Patou Pour Homme, which is Patou Pour Homme Privé, right? These are two of the greatest sandalwood fragrances of all time. But there is definitely this, I would not be surprised if it came out that Patou Pour Homme had used Monsieur Carven as a little bit of a springboard, right? It doesn't have, this is much more spicy. This is much more powdery. Monsieur Carven is much more powdery. But I think what ended up happening is that, so what happened was Raymond Chalin realized that if all of a sudden these heavier notes were to take over, okay, that you would not be able to smell the beautiful sandalwood as it dries down. And the sandalwood stays, it's stubbornly on your skin as the hours go by. Even into the dry down, you will get this oak mossy sandalwood masculine feel, right? As that powderiness starts to recede, you'll get that, okay? So just imagine, Patou Pour Homme meets something like Abbey Rouge, meets something like Paul Sebastian's Fine Cologne, meets something like Canon Cologne. I mean, for the vintage lovers, you're talking about something amazing. Maybe a little bit of that sharp anise from Azzaro from the same year, 1978. And, you know, I think it's much better balanced than something like Paul Sebastian's Fine Cologne. I think this is much muskier, much more unbalanced in my opinion. And, you know, this is one such example where I really feel like as a fragrance lover, you have to know your history. Like, you have to understand and study the past to kind of know where you're going. It's almost like trying to talk about modern world events and have no idea what happened in World War I or World War II. I mean, it's like you're arguing with somebody online, let's say, who puts up their newest video of Maison Francis Kirkjohn's release, or Bodicea the Victorious, or whatever, Xerjoff, or whatever the hell the release is, right? And you're sitting there arguing with them, and they have no frame of reference to kind of what's happened before, right? It's like arguing with a child, almost, right? So you have to know your history. Knowing your history is so important to know how we got from point A to point B, how we got from here to here. And what's so funny is if you know your history, you'll realize many of these niche fragrances, which they charge an arm and a leg for, are just reinterpretations of stuff from the past anyways. So it is almost necessary I'm not going to sit up here and say this is a must own or a must buy, because there are some very sensitive people in the fragrance community who take offense to that. But for me, I would love to own a bottle of this. This is absolutely full bottle worthy. On the list, this is something that should be in the collection of a vintage enthusiast, let's say. Let's put it that way. It should be in the collection of a vintage enthusiast. And it just goes to show, I mean, it's May of 2024. I started my channel at the end of 2021. Vintages have been something that I've looked for constantly throughout the years. Now, over the last 10 months, I've had to put a halt to that. But let's say almost 2 years of just constant searching for vintage fragrances. And I never even stumbled across this. Never even thought about buying a bottle of Monsieur Carven. And so it just goes to show the depth and breadth of offerings from the past that you have the ability to hunt down and get to know and all of this stuff. And you can't smell everything, especially without the help of the community. I've been very blessed to have people like Armando sending me stuff like this. But if possible, if you're somebody like me and you like vintage fragrances from the past, this is not one to overlook. I'm telling you, even though this is not, I would not put this in the powerhouse category of fragrances. I would say this is like a fragrance almost out of time. Not out of time like it's gonna die, but like out of time, like it's lost in time. Like Raymond Chailan took a composition that he worked on in the 50s or 60s, dusted it off, and just stuck it in a Carven bottle in 1978. And it just somehow fits perfectly for some reason. I love this stuff. I would absolutely own a bottle of this. And I mean, this is just a first impression, early impression, so take it with a grain of salt. Maybe my thoughts will change over time, but I am very, very impressed with this. As, I mean, you know, I totally expected to be impressed. But I think it's a great example of why it's so important to kind of know your history and know what came before, and really study the past. To go forward, you got to go backwards, is what I've always said. And so this is a great example. This is, if I owned a bottle of this and wore a lot of it and got to know it better, I would have no problem putting this as a vintage Hall of Fame type review. But for now, we have a discontinued gem review. And so maybe we'll have our first upgrade from a discontinued gem to a vintage Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame videos are supposed to be reserved for the fragrances I consider to be the most iconic, the most influential. Like these two, actually these three, will definitely be getting a vintage Hall of Fame review. I don't think I've reviewed any of these three yet. Azaro pour Homme, Abbey Rouge, and Patou pour Homme. And they're all kind of swirling around in Monsieur Carven as a, you know, Monsieur Carven kind of, I mentioned that pendulum swinging earlier, right? Obviously, it kind of goes to the past, right? With things like Abbey Rouge and Canon from 1966, which very few people talk about this fragrance, but this is really good stuff, especially in the vintage form. Or it also swings the pendulum a little to the future, because I would not be surprised if Patou pour Homme, you know, used something like Monsieur Carven as like a springboard to jump off on. So anyways, that's my thought. Just a little quick ramble on a fragrance I never would have got to smell if not for the kindness in the community. So again, thank you, Armando. Thank you to everyone who always watches and comments. If you happen to be one of the lucky ones to have experience with this or own a bottle, do let me know what you think of Monsieur Carven. I mentioned Raymond Chailan. I will definitely be doing a ranked video for him if I have not done one already. So lots more content to come on the channel. So I appreciate everyone supporting, watching, commenting, liking, all that good stuff. So thanks for being here with us as always. Cheers, and you guys have a great day. Bye-bye.